And we are back live. I believe I've had a few stream issues here, but we are back again. We haven't missed much action, but we are seeing again the back of Hardest Boyser. Nick Hodgson is all over him. And in fact, Nick Hodgson has now set up the fastest lap of the race. So really showing what he's got in the car tonight. He hasn't let off from Hardest at all the whole race yet. We are only 3 laps in, but it seems like he has a mountain of pressure behind him, does Hardest Boyser. Nick Hodgson, in fact, perhaps made one slight error earlier. I would say his car is not completely on rails going through that bumpy chicane at the end of the back straight. But here we see he's almost got a run down into the double chicane here, or getting very close to the back of Hardest, letting him know he's all over him at the moment. And just taking a glance slightly behind, Mike LaRue still trying to get onto the back of those two. Oh, we see a little bit of dirt kicked up by Nick Hodgson. So he's going to have to keep himself within his limits currently. He doesn't want to let himself down with too many of those moments running slightly off the track. That will eliminate his chance to get a good run down any of the straights especially. Hardest Boyser, though, currently soaking up that pressure quite well. He's doing well to give himself solid exits onto all of the straights involved. As we can see, he goes through the final chicane and the last apex very cleanly. Nick Hodgson getting a little bit squirrely on the rear there as he goes through. So he'll want to maintain that, Will Hardest, and just keep going, keep the momentum up, especially through the straights at Zolder. This is not going to be an easy track to complete any overtakes. We did miss the fact that Mike LaRue has now set up the fastest lap of the race. So while Mikael Matthews was looking to check out a bit in the beginning, he's perhaps already stuck himself in a bit of more of a conservative mode, eking out those tires slowly, trying not to abuse them too much. 2.4 seconds currently is as comfortable as it may get for the opening point of this race. He's got that up to 2.5 in fact, but he should also know out in front currently that he is unchallenged on pace at the moment. He doesn't need to look to do any damage to his tires that may come back to haunt him before the pit stops. So in fact, he will hopefully look to keep his gap as solid as possible, but also maintain the tire wear to not have any spikes towards the end of that stint. We've seen Nick has actually slipped off the back of Hardest Boyser, and that's only let Mike LaRue into the action a little bit more. All that hard driving from Mike has certainly paid off, where he's caught both cars ahead, but specifically the back of Nick Hodgson currently. So that fastest lap of the race he set up has paid dividends. He's coming up to the final chicane now. Can he maintain a clean line through there? Look to give himself a run into turn 1. It's caught a little bit of dirt, but it is a good line. He's kept that car a little bit sideways coming out. Hasn't let down the speed too much, so he's kept it pinned. He's right on the back of Nick Hodgson. A bit of a shorter straight along pit road, so you won't look to get too many overtaking opportunities there. It certainly will be a brave overtake indeed to send it up the inside into turn 1. Often drivers will close the door on you there, and you're looking for an outside overtaker. That's never likely to happen there. But coming onto the back straight now, we've got one more turn, looking to exit strong, and then he might just get himself a bit closer for a run into that back bumpy chicane after the longest straight of the track. Nick's done well to exit strongly there, and we can see how bumpy those Porsches get. They certainly have their suspensions completely unsettled over that bumpy chicane, where it's imperative to be cutting the apex as much as possible. Some devilish sausage curbs, as we can see here on the double chicane as well, where you don't want to be upsetting the car too much. It can also have a detrimental impact on the tires in overheating them and offsetting the tire pressures a bit if you hit too many of those curbs, but certainly it is the optimal line to be taking to straight line those chicanes as much as possible. I do dare say we've been gifted with a bit of a dry race here, so certainly there was no lingering dampness on the track. We see a sheen there, but I believe that's more from those headlights shining off the smooth surface of the tarmac more than any water that we'll see there. We see Mike LaRue dip a rear tire slightly off the exit curbs there, perhaps onto the dusty section of the track, so he's not going to do himself any favors with his exits onto the straight there. we've seen between these two battling, or I dare say three battling up ahead, we've seen a little bit of a gap opened up to Sas van der Westhuizen, who finds himself in a bit of an island by himself already. We have missed the fact that Roxanne Bartel has earned herself P6, so she's done very well to jump Sean Bingham as well. In fact, we've seen somebody fall down the order that I can't quite tell who that is currently. I believe it Greg Hofart who's gone a little bit down the order. So certainly Mike Leroux as the winner of the first few laps position wise, but we've also seen Roxanne do very well to gain a few positions herself. Started in P9 if my memory serves me correctly, so she's done very well to get herself up 3 positions, currently in the top 10 as the position winner. I do spot a Dirk Brand down in P10, which it does fail me to remember where exactly he started, but I would dare to say that he's also jumped up a few positions himself, currently sitting in P10, rounding out that top 10. Ahead of him, we see Martin Groenewald is a little further up the road, about 3.5 seconds just under from Dirk Brandt, who himself, Martin Groenewald, is half a second from Mark Hennebree. Mark Hennebree 7/10 behind Sean Bingham, so that's a bit of a close battle that we'll have to keep an eye on as well. And in fact, jumping ahead, we've missed the fact that Mike Leroux has jumped ahead of Nick Hodgson now, again maintaining that fastest lap of the race. He's done very well. We've missed the overtake. I perhaps dare say we might get a little bit of a replay, but I will not be too optimistic on that. No, it looks like we have missed the chance to get a replay on that already. So sadly missing the position change, but Nick Hodgson again will now resume his battle to stay on the back of the driver ahead of him. In fact, Mike Leroux is the lone man in the top 5 here in a Mercedes, so perhaps a bit of a strategic call there as well. That Mercedes AMG traditionally does handle curbs quite well, as a very balanced car. In fact, I know in ACC it's not as let's say stuck and on rails as in other sims, but still a very good all-round of a car there. Has the top speed to compete with the big lads, but also very balanced over the curbs as well to be able to really throw it through corners. We haven't seen too much more of a gap open up between Mikael Matthews in P1 currently and Hardus Boyser sitting behind him in P2. That gap now to 2.8 seconds. We have seen Mike Leroux close up a lot of ground and time currently. So it'll be interesting to see if he can get past Hardus Boyser and perhaps even chase down the lead car in Mikael Matthews. Taking a little glance back towards that three-way battle that we had between Sean Bingham, Mark Hennebree and Martin Groenewald. We are seeing a little bit of separation between Sean in P7 and Mark Hennebree in P8 currently, but Martin Groenewald is still just about half a second down on Mark Hennebree, so he will be still chasing for that position. We see another pink Porsche, in fact, in Black Owl Sim Sports pink, matching Roxanne Bartel, currently sitting in P6, also in one of the pink Black Owl Sim Sports cars. Do well to keep an eye on Mike Leroux, though, because he is certainly looking to chase down Hardus Boyce at the moment. He's got that gap under 8/10, currently sitting on 7/10 just about from Hardus, and he's certainly shown that he's chased down 3 drivers already today and claimed positions, earned them quite rightfully, so he'll be putting in the work, looking to maintain consistency. He's got that gap now under 6/10, just about 5.5 shy of Hardus Boyce ahead of him, and you can just about see that that gap is not much between himself and P2 currently, with Nick Hodgson following very closely behind, just shy of half a second down the road as well from Mike Leroux. So a bit of a train forming here. Hardus will have it all to do to get away from these two, and at the moment I don't expect that's going to be an easy task or even an obtainable one, considering how fast these boys are behind. See Mike LaRue's dipped under half a second in that gap currently. So perhaps chasing down a bit, trying to put in just a little bit on, if he can find one corner or two perhaps that he can see himself better than Hardness, he might just use that to his advantage. Interesting to see that Michael Matthews has just about maintained that gap of 2.8 seconds, as I think, if my eyesight was not failing me, that he is perhaps the only McLaren car in the top 10. Sorry, I apologize. Dirk Brand rounding out the top 10 is in fact a McLaren as well, with Greg Hofart just off that top 10 in P11. So that would indicate that the McLaren's got some special noise inside itself if it can come out and shine on this drier track in Zolder. We've dipped under 45 minutes still to go in this race, so just past a quarter way now, but all to do still. This is very early days, and we have in fact perhaps had Michael Matthews hearing a bit of the commentary. He's added a tenth to his gap between himself and Hardus Boyser in P2. Mike LaRue, though, has cracked on the pace and taken off another tenth of his gap between himself and Hardus Boyser, nipping out just to let Hardus know, I am still here, I'm coming for that P2, you better not let it slip, I'll claim it from you. These two pushing each other on, though, we found a little bit of a gap opening up between P2, P3, and then Nick Hodgson in P4 currently. Just got to 1 second distance between those, but he also might be playing a bit of a strategy card here, in which case he doesn't want to burn those tires out too much. Hopefully let the front two ahead of him battle. We've seen that Hardus Boyser did take some dirt there, going very wide on the exit onto the back straight. Will that give Mike LaRue a chance? Mike LaRue looking to sneak out, but deciding against it, tucking in behind Hardus to follow through the bumpy chicanes on the back straight. Again, taking his car slightly offline. He's looking perhaps for an inside maneuver into the double chicanes on the back straight. But this is a very gutsy move to go up the inside there. You also, if your opponent manages to stay and stick and battle around the outside, was that perhaps Michael Matthews claiming a little bit of dirt off track there? But he has in fact added almost a second, another 8 tenths to the distance between himself and P2. So perhaps showing signs that he is still pushing now, cracking into another phase where he does. And Mike, in fact, is just under 2 tenths now. He's constantly sneaking out from behind Hardus there. He's looking for the opening. He will not let up currently. Michael Matthews perhaps claiming the fastest lap of the race. I see 2 purple placards shared amongst Michael Matthews and Mike LaRue now. Could just be the timing charts failing me. In fact, I'd like to just check if we can refresh those in-game a bit. We are still seeing purple in P1 and P3. So interesting to see if they've either shared, they have in fact got the exact same personal best currently of a 136.655, both of them sharing the fastest lap of the race. So Mike LaRue certainly giving an indication that if he can clear Hardus Boyser, he's got a chance to chase down the lead car with the pace that he's currently showing, while perhaps even being slightly held up by Hardus. Nick Hodgson also doing well to still hang on to the back of these two. He doesn't want to give them too much breathing room to get away here. He really does want to stay connected to this battle going on for P2 currently, give himself the best shot of capitalizing and taking any advantage of any slight slip-ups from these two drivers. Although, to be fair, currently I don't see many slips happening here. We see a bit of aggression and dirt kicked up occasionally, but I believe that just shows how much they are using the track. Not really losing out on too much time when doing that. So just about keeping it right on the limit of what the track can allow, while maintaining their optimum speed and lines through most of these corners. Gap now as well between Michael and Hardus has opened up to 4 seconds. So really is clearing out, as we see Mike LaRue again using all the track going from transition of T2 to T3. So that really is something to see the difference in line, what he is willing and daring to take out of the track using that Mercedes AMG. Perhaps something that that car is more comfortable with, running out so wide, as opposed to those Porsches that are sandwiching him currently in P2 of Hardest Boyce and P4 in Nick Hodgson. Nick has also taken out another 3 to 4 tenths out of the gap now ahead, so perhaps sensing his chance to look to push up and catch the back of these two ahead of him is now, and what can he make of this? As they are also catching a back marker currently, so it'd be interesting to see if they can make something happen with the back marker playing an effect here, as it is going to, that looks like... I believe that is, no, that's not Chevy Bassin, so my lap chart is lying to me a little bit. We'll keep an eye on these three again, as Mike LaRue's again caught up to the back of, or just about had caught up to the back of Hardest Boyce, but then didn't get the best exits out of the final chicane, which has given Nick a bit of a run here. He'll think better against trying to dive up the inside into a very fast turn one. Zolder is quite a devilish first sector to try and make any overtake, get that done on the pit straight. But we do have a very long 2 back straights, in fact, one straighter than the other, but down the hill on the run from the first chicane on the back straight into the double chicane down the hill. You'll get almost 2 overtaking opportunities should you be able to get a cleaner exit than the opponent up front. And Mike's gone from one extreme to the other, looking for an overtake on Hardest Boyce. He perhaps is now looking to defend from Nick Hodgson. He's cleared himself a little bit from Nick Hodgson behind, but I'm sure Nick now is currently looking to push and take advantage. He doesn't want to get held up. I believe he wouldn't think that he will get held up too much, but if he does feel he has the pace to take on one or not both of these cars, then he certainly will want to clear them as soon as he can. Mike LaRue teetering between the two at the moment, going from attacking to defending to once again now attacking Hardest Boyce. So we also see perhaps some difference in the lines and how each driver adopts different strategies and styles throughout the circuit. We see Mike has got a very clean exit out of that final chicane, but as does Hardest Boyce, and we see Nick Hodgson's approach to that final chicane is very aggressive and cutting curbs, often running a bit wide, and perhaps the car not quite turning into the exit that he's looking for. He does seem to let the two drivers get a little bit ahead. Thank you for the heads up, Ryan. I believe. There we are. So that was muted. I'm not sure how, but that is coming through now, or should be. Thank you for the heads up. So unfortunately, you've been stuck with just the sound of my wonderful voice, but then the game audio now should be showing through. We can hear a bit of those engines roaring as well. Now some back markers coming to play again, so it's caused a little bit of strategy between the two. Mike LaRue looking up the inside now. Has he got that? He has in fact got that move done. Hardest Boyce has been demoted to P3. Mike LaRue now is solidly in P2. So what has been 10 laps and coming has finally paid off. Mike LaRue sharing the fastest lap currently of the race with Michael Matthews has shown he has the pace to get himself into P2. But after all of that, it seems like we have about 5 seconds gap that's been created between P1 and now P2 in Mike LaRue. So can he chip away at that? Can he now be unleashed and release his natural pace in this track? Difference in cars really showing throughout the final sector especially. Michael Matthews perhaps was keeping his eye on the action that was going on behind him. He started trying to open up that gap as well, adding 2 tenths since Mike LaRue has claimed P2. And we'll now see if Hardus perhaps is slipping off a bit off the pace, using too much of the tyres to start on the opening stint, perhaps giving Nick Hodgson a chance here. He'll sense it himself, as is often the case. If giving up one position with drivers close behind, it is a very great risk that you might give up more than that. And we'll see if Nick can then capitalize here. He's got that gap back under 3/10, but Hardus also has not let off the back of Mike LaRue entirely. So he'll look to hopefully hang on and either find himself back in P2, where he might feel he rightfully belongs after very good qualifying and good opening stints so far. See a little bit of separation now being created between Mike LaRue. Backmarkers perhaps playing a small hand in that, but we've seen them do well to get out the way. In fact, one going very far out the way to make sure they're no longer holding up any of the cars behind that are battling for position for the podium places, in fact. And was that that was in fact one of the backmarkers diving into the pits. So we've seen the biggest gap open up between P2, P3 and P4 that we've seen the entire race so far. So that might just have been a little bit of a hand played by traffic, but that is how the races roll in ACC. Traffic is one of the obstacles you must deal with, and deal with effectively if you wish to maintain your times, not lose too much, and of course play the battles for positions that you can. Mike LaRue has done well though to clear that traffic as fast as he could, creating a bit of a gap now between himself, Nick Hodgson and Hardus Boyser, and Nick Hodgson has also done well to now get into P3. Hardus perhaps may feel he's let himself down a bit there. He was absorbing pressure so well earlier, but a few small time errors and a bit of traffic, and that's put him now down in P4, and with it all to do 3 seconds behind Nick Hodgson now. We'll do well to keep an eye on Sas van der Westhuizen, because he's also brought that gap down from 6 seconds now to 3.5 behind Hardus. So it will really be a telling story to see if Sas can keep chipping away at the time, perhaps showing us that Hardus may have just abused the tires a bit too much. That's let himself down towards the second half of this opening stint. Being so fixated with the battle that's been happening for P2, P3 and P4, we missed a little bit of action behind us. So if we cast our memories back, knowing that Roxanne Bartle was sitting comfortably in P6 at a stage, she has lost some time, perhaps an error that we may have missed, or a little bit of action that would have caused that, but Sean Bingham has found himself back into P6, quite a bit of a gap between himself behind Sas van der Westhuizen in P5, but also 5.8 seconds down to Mark Hennebree, that's currently in P7. Mark Hennebree still has Martin Groenewald right up the backside of him. That is half a second down. Memory serves correctly, that was still half a second about 8 to 10 laps ago. So doing really well to hang on to the back of Mark Hennebree is Martin Groenewald. And we see Roxanne Bartle currently in P9 now, is just about 7/10 shy of those two up front as well. Fortunately, we've seen the two McLarens have switched places in P10 of Greg Hofart now, and Dirk in P11, who was P10 before. I've seen a bit of a gap created between them, so perhaps Dirk letting himself down with an error at some point. But all pride, all at stake in the McLarens, as we are expecting and hoping to see a second McLaren in that top 10. Perhaps if all goes according to plan for both those two drivers in P10 and P11 currently, we might just see both of them slip into that top 10. We see Mike LaRue is first to pull the trigger in the top runners. He's dived into the pits, perhaps feeling that the tires had gone off a little bit, but he's certainly taken advantage of that opening stint. Perhaps took longer than he would have liked to clear the P3 and P2 to get into the position he felt he deserved, but we'll see what he can do now after his pit stop. Hardus Boyser as well has dived into the pits, so perhaps following Mike LaRue in, maybe deciding whoever of those two ahead pits, he'll be following them in. seeing if he can perhaps take an advantage out of pitting early. Nick Hodgson has in fact stayed out, and that's a trend that I've often seen with Nick. He's looking to go long a lot of the time, get as much as he can out of the first stint. He wasn't being held up too much by the two ahead of him originally, and then rightfully earning that place of P3 from Hardus once Hardus dropped off the times a bit. So perhaps feeling like now that he has complete clean air, he can try bang out a few lap times and perhaps get a bit of an overcut going on the Mike LaRue and Hardus Boyser, the Mercedes and the Alpine respectively. As we do see them now come out in P7 and P8. Oh, that's a back marker going a little bit off. That's going to be quite a bit of damage, unfortunately. So sorry to see for them, but they'll likely be diving into the pits themselves. Certainly unplanned on that amount of damage, but perhaps just around the time that they would have been planning to come to the pits anyway, as we do see they're struggling to hold the car off. And Nick Hodgson does one more lap and goes into the pits himself. Be interesting to see where he does come out. Barely about half a second was separating Nick from Mike LaRue and Hardus Boyser. Mike LaRue had maintained a bit of a gap, or rather gained a bit of a gap of about a second originally. So it'll be interesting to see where Nick will rejoin once he exits the pits. See Mike LaRue currently going through the double chicanes through sector 2, starting on sector 3, so we'll see how close he can get to claiming that position back from Nick Hodgson, considering he is currently sharing the fastest lap of the race. We'd venture to say that he should have the pace, barring any errors or time loss that he may have had. It's looking very clean lines through that fast kink where you'll be flat out from the exit of that 90-degree right-hander. Coming through the final chicane now, we'll try and spot where Nick Hodgson, he's just left the pit stall, so he will rejoin the track, but will he rejoin that in time? Mike LaRue is now crossing the start-finish line. And we just about see Nick Hodgson's car going through pit road now. He'll still need to gain some speed before he rejoins the track after the second corner. And in fact, we see, is that the leader of Michael Matthews? It is indeed. So the winner of the pit stops looks to be Mike LaRue. There we are. Timing chart still to update on my side, but he's caught up right to the back of Michael Matthews. We should expect to see an update. There we are, 2/10 just about from Michael Matthews in the lead car. So Mike LaRue really has pulled a card out there, gaining about 5 seconds almost on the leader in Michael Matthews, not knowing how much time he may have lost in his own pit stop. But that's certainly just on how much distance we see between him and Nick Hodgson, and perhaps taking into an assumption that Nick Hodgson and Mike LaRue may have maintained very similar times on their in-laps, that Michael Matthews has surely lost a bit of time there somehow in his pit stop. But now perhaps the most pressure he's received all race since the green light. So this will be interesting to see how Michael can hold up that pressure and see if he can keep that place. Based on the historical data we've seen from this track so far tonight, we would venture to say that Mike LaRue is earning his right as a bit of an expert in completing the overtake, as he gets quite sideways there coming out the final chicane. That won't do him any favors to get down the pit straight side by side. So he'll look to tuck in most likely, clean up that line a bit and see if he can perhaps give himself a better shot down the back straight. And let's remember and watch as we are coming up to the back of some traffic, so this will be risky stuff to see if he can perhaps hazard a bit of a risk, as we see Michael having to tuck in behind the back marker. That would have slowed him down slightly. Is that going to give Mike a bit of an opening here? He'd have to be going 3 wide just about now to get a chance, so it looks like he's going to stick in behind Michael as they go through the bumpy chicane at the end of the back straight. But now he's right on the back of Michael coming over that hill. Will that give him an opening into the double chicane? Doesn't look like he's quite got it there in the brake zone, so he again will tuck in behind. This will be interesting to see as they approach a lot of traffic at the moment. Looks like the entire field have completed pit stops, so we've seen Dirk Brand drop quite a far way down the order from where he was in P11. We've seen Gregory Hofart, though, climb up a position, currently into P9. That does bring us a third McLaren into that top 10, as I hoped. Unfortunately, that's not the McLaren of Dirk Brand, but that is the McLaren of... that's Francois Erasmus. That is currently showing P9 on the right-hand side, but on the timing tower is 10. He is in fact P9. He's got ahead of Greg Hofart. So Greg Hofart currently in P10. So he resumes his position that he had before in P10, but somehow Francois Erasmus has also pulled a bit of a magic card out during the pit stops. We've seen him jump up into P9 comfortably. So Mikhail has created a little bit of a gap. I wouldn't say enough to breathe yet. Oh, as he gets very sideways coming out that bumpy chicane, we can see again the difference in the handling of the Mercedes-AMG through that chicane compared to the McLarens and the likes of the Porsches. And that McLaren, in fact, is getting very bumpy attacking those curbs. So that's going to give Mike LaRue a bit of an opening if he can capitalize on this. He's right on the tailpipes of Michael Matthews currently. So Michael is going to have to almost switch off and forget he's there for a while, because that certainly would be very distracting. Go as far as to say that is Mike LaRue's game at the moment, is to create a bit of a distraction in the rear view mirrors of his opponents up front. He's earned himself a total of, is it 4 overtakes so far, so he's done very well as possibly the biggest gainer of the top 10 tonight. See, that gap has opened up a little bit now. It's still saying half a second on the timing charts, but if I spy correctly, that has certainly grown into a more close to a second. There we are, 1.2 seconds as it updates. So perhaps Mikhail finally able to settle into his rhythm after that pit stop. You see a bit more separation behind, so Nick Hodgson has brought the gap under 3 seconds now, but all three of them have gapped Hardus Boyser currently in P4. He's lost quite a bit of time and positions if we cast our minds back to just a few laps before that pit stop, when he did first lose the position to Mike LaRue and shortly after to Nick Hodgson as well. We've seen him drop 7 seconds down on Nick Hodgson now, so he's currently sitting in P4 is Hardus Boyser. We see Sass has lost about a second from where he was earlier, but still doing well to keep that gap under 5 seconds to Hardus Boyser. He knows there's just one big error away from perhaps claiming a position in P4. Currently sitting in P5 is Sass van der Westhuizen, with Sean Bingham still in that P6, having dropped himself down a few positions, regained them. He's currently sitting comfortably in P6 with not a car in sight behind or in front, apart from a bit of traffic and some back markers. As the blue flag is waved quite sternly to hopefully give Sean Bingham a little bit of space to clear the cars ahead. And the gap between Mark Henneberry and Martin Groenewald is perhaps smaller than it's been all race as well. Martin Groenewald has done really well to hang on to the back of Mark Henneberry, but also props go out to Mark Henneberry, who's done amazingly to absorb all of this pressure that's been applied so far throughout this race. He hasn't had a moment to breathe with Martin Groenewald tagging onto the back of him all race long so far. This looks to be a very close battle, as we've got a stray Cohen that has been murdered lying in the middle of the road there. Interesting to see that. We'll see if that Cohen is still there coming around the next time. Gap between Mark Henneberry and Martin Grunwald is still just under 4/10. Just casting an eye back as well, we saw a bit of a close gap, which has now opened up again. I believe that was between Kevin PitCrew and Michael Main. So interesting to see what happened with that gap. It opened up on the timing towers, but it is still under 8/10. And in fact, we've seen Kevin PitCrew has lost the place, in fact. So perhaps just a bit slow to update. We have missed something going on there, but it was certainly... Oh, and we've seen him going off again, so perhaps struggling to keep that car on the road at the moment. Be interesting to know if any drivers have decided to keep the tyre set that they were on in the first stint and just put a bit of a splash and dash and see if they can keep their consistency and pace throughout. Certainly a challenge if they are not changing any tyres in this on the circuit. Zolder is not one that I find too fun to drive with worn tyres. I would imagine the drivers feel the same about that, but when the conditions are dry throughout, then it does open up the potential. As we see, is that Kevin PitCrew unfortunately has got sideways and been collected by the car coming through after that. So it's just certainly not going his way currently. We pop an eye forward again. We do see that Cohen that is resting in peace right in the middle of the road, but Martin Grunwald is really applying pressure here to Mark Henneberry. Mark Henneberry has done amazingly to absorb all of this so far. The trick is to just forget what's behind you and concentrate on what's in front of you, and he certainly has shown his capability to do so. Martin Grunwald has just dipped that gap 1,000th under 2/10 right now, and going through the final chicane, we can see it really is all over the back of Mark Henneberry. And throughout the field, this is our closest battle currently, and it has been going on all race. Martin Grunwald has not had the chance to get alongside, at least that we've seen on both the timing charts. We see a very interesting line there, and he could apply a bit of an undercut. Doesn't quite have the momentum to carry the speed up the inside of Mark Henneberry. Mark Henneberry perhaps choosing to defend on a line where he thought that Martin Grunwald was perhaps faster through the corner there, but certainly made a conscious decision to defend the inside of that turn. Oh, and we see another car lose it up front. Is that in fact Sean Bingham? No, we see Sean Bingham going through the following chicane, so it looks like that was a back marker. No positional change will be occurring there. Oh, but we have missed. Martin Grunwald has taken the place from Mark Henneberry. Unfortunately, don't see that coming up on the replay list, so we have missed that change by checking behind. I would say it was likely instigated by the car losing itself at that chicane. Perhaps Mark having to lift off slightly just for safety concern, and Martin Grunwald capitalizing on that situation by keeping the car pinned. He should feel slightly aggrieved by that as well. He's done so well to absorb the pressure throughout, perhaps taking the safer approach through that chicane when the car had gone off, or rather lost control ahead of him. But now he'll do really well to hang on to the back of Martin Grunwald. This will be a test to see whether Martin was in fact being slightly held up by Mark. He looks like he is holding that gap as it stands currently at 7/10. This will certainly be the best on-track action we'll see currently. If we cast an eye back to Marco Graca, that is... I feel like he may have just taken... Yes, he has indeed just taken the position from Michael Main. So it seems like we are late in finding the positional changes around Michael Main at the moment. But Michael Main has gone backwards 2 positions so far in the last 3 or 4 laps. So that is a bit unfortunate for him. We have now just about reached 15 minutes remaining in the race. So we are now into the final stages, the last quarter of this race, and perhaps the time now where drivers will be pushing with everything they've got left, taking into account that tire wear will now be quite high. Degradation on a track like this, especially through Sector 1 and Sector 3, will not be ideal. It will be how they have taken the track before, as aggressive as they have got with curbs. Also allows them to perhaps keep tire wear a bit down by not having to steer the car too much on a lot of those bends. But a turn like that, T1 will really be taking it all out of the tires, especially going through turn 1 to 3. That will be a very, let's say, high speed tires where you lean on the rubber quite a bit on the outside. Going through 3, sorry, is that 4? That's 3 right-handers in a row to get onto the back straight. All of them medium to high speed, carrying as much momentum as you can, using up the tires. And we see Martin Groenewald now is got a little bit of a gap that's opened up between himself and Mark Hennebury. They are coming up to the back marker though, so we'll see if that does make any difference to the battle at the moment. Oh, and we've seen another car lose control, unfortunately, at another chicane. That would be the first time we've seen it happen at that double chicane, at least on the screen tonight. But quite a few of those cars struggling with the chicanes here at Zolder. These are naturally very aggressive chicanes where you are playing on a knife's edge with the sausage curbs that are on each apex. We did miss the fact that Michael Matthews took the fastest lap of the race, reclaimed it in full by just under 1.5 tenths there, and he has lost a little bit of time. Oh, and unfortunately, Mike LaRue has earned himself a drive-through penalty, so that will be disappointment on his part. Had just about closed that gap down from 1.4 to 1.2 seconds. He's found himself with a drive-through now. I can only imagine that's from taking track limits a bit too liberally. We have seen him run very wide on some of the corners, using as much of the track as he can, and that's perhaps caught up with him, unfortunately. That's likely going to see him drop off the podium places as well, perhaps right down to a P5, P6 once he finishes with that drive through. So we'll see how that does work out for him, but considering that Hardesboyce has actually got quite a gap that's opened up between himself and Nick Hodgson ahead, but it looks like we may see him go all the way down to around P5. He has entered the pits now to serve that penalty immediately, so we'll see where he does come out for this one. But that is a bit of a slower pit lane, both at entry and at exit at the Zolder circuit. So that's not going to be ideal for any time management from a drive-through. So Nick Hodgson is already rounding turn 3. Was that turn 4 now? Hardest ahead is already going through turn 3, so we see Sass is also rounding there. Where has that put Mike LaRue out? He's only exiting the pit lane now, so that has dropped him all the way back to, it looks like, P5, yes, with P6 just behind now. Just on natural pace that we've seen here tonight, I would not expect that Sean Bingham's going to be able to catch Mike LaRue up front, but that certainly is a big distance between Mike LaRue currently in P6 and now Sass van der Westhuizen looks like just under 10 seconds up the road from him. So he really has it all to do. He's going to need at least 1 second per lap that remains, and he's still going to have a lot of work to manage to try and get past Sass van der Westhuizen once he catches up there. But we'll be keeping an eye on those times and the deltas, see if he does still have anything left in the tank at the moment to be pushing out fastest laps. Sass's personal best is currently 4/10 off of Mike LaRue's personal best, so I'd venture to say that Sass has enough to keep that position. That is a very tall order that Mike has left himself with after that drive-through penalty to gain any positions after that. We might just see him finishing the race in P5 now. That does, unfortunately, well, unfortunately for our viewing pleasure, but fortunately for Michael Matthews, gift a bit of a race win to him. All he needs to do now is bring it home to see that flag. He certainly will remain unchallenged or aside from himself in these closing few laps. He's now 7 seconds ahead of now P2 Nick Hodgson, but also respect to Nick Hodgson, who's had a very clean and let's say testing race until now, having to really keep his nerve around the drivers ahead that were around him previously. Mike LaRue, Hydros Boyce, and Nick Hodgson all having a battle throughout the first stint for the places of P2, 3, and 4. So he's done really well to just keep his head throughout all of this, and he's found himself very comfortably in P2 now, barring any unforeseen events and sudden occurrences. We would expect to see the top 3 finishing as it stands currently. Not forgetting though that Hydros Boyce is slightly losing time on Nick Hodgson. That gap is now up to 13 seconds, and Sass van der Westhuizen is certainly being brought into play here. He's now less than a 2 seconds shy of Hydros, and we still have plenty of time here for Sass to catch the back of him. We can see there's just a back marker that currently separates the two, as their Hydros crosses the line, and now Sass, they are really not far from each other. Hydros going through turn 1, and we can see Sass following behind that back marker between them, just behind that. The gap is now up to just above 2 seconds, but we'll see if that is different drive styles as we go through each of these turns at Zolder. There's something to be gained, something to be lost from each and every corner. We see the differences between Sass and the car behind on how much track they can use. And also, I would say, could depend on how many track limit violations each driver has to spare, and if they can use that to their advantage as well. Almost as if Hydros Boyce heard what I said, because he has also now taken almost a second out of the gap between himself and Nick Hodgson, thereby also giving himself almost a second between himself and Sass van der Westhuizen behind. So that certainly shows that perhaps he got too comfortable in the gap that he was creating, and also ground that he was losing to Sass has been woken up a bit by seeing Sass approaching in his rearview mirrors. And perhaps my biggest sadness of the race is seeing this this race-long battle that we had earlier between Martin Groenewald and Mark Henneberry be a bit affected by one of the cars unfortunately losing control. Certainly it is how racing goes sometimes, but sad to see that their separation of less than a second for lap after lap after lap has been discontinued. Would have almost enjoyed seeing that go all the way to the checkered flag, but certainly won't be counting Mark Henneberry out. Just a little bit of traffic to affect Martin Groenewald here, perhaps being able to crack out a few good solid lap times as well. We might see this battle still yet commence before the checkered flag. And we've dropped just under 6 minutes to go in this race. We've seen quite a bit of separation throughout the cars currently. There are no current battles going on track, bar it being a battle with the time charts to try and see if any ground can be closed up on cars ahead. I'll take a quick review through the top 10. So you've seen Michael Matthews practically control the race from his side. He's led from the green light until his current position, now sitting in P1. He did have a bit of a scare when Mike LaRue pulled out a bit of a magic card and gained about 5 seconds in the pit stops to come up less than 2/10 behind Michael Matthews on pit exit. He hounded Michael for a few minutes, but he did unfortunately not, or rather fortunately for Michael Matthews, was not able to capitalize on that. But we have seen a strong race so far from Michael Matthews. He's certainly been an earner of that first position that he finds himself in, and everything going according to plan. He deserves the win that he is looking on the cards for currently. Nick Hodgson in P2, we did see him start the race in P3, if memory serves. It was, I believe, himself in P3 and Sas van der Merwe in P4 rounding out the second row of the grid when we did start this race and went green. He did see himself drop down to P4 at a stage. He hung on to the back of Hardus Boyce and Mike LaRue, who battled for P2 for an extended period of time. Hardus did drop off the pace a little bit. We'll get to him in a moment. Then we did see Mike LaRue capitalize on that. Nick Hodgson very shortly after, I believe it was in the same lap or the very next lap, he did then take the place from Hardus Boyce to find himself sitting in P3, and he certainly has deserved finding himself sitting in P2 currently, looking like he may well take the second spot on the podium. He certainly has deserved it with a very solid race until now. That is not the first time we've seen him get very squirrely through the final chicane. His optimum style is to attack that chicane. He's gotten wide a few times, but you also see him get very aggressive with that Alpine through the curbs, exiting that final chicane. But it has worked out for him today. He's maintained consistency, especially through the first sector. Hardus Boyce are currently sitting in P3. I wouldn't dare say that he's certainly guaranteed to round out the podium, but based on how he's performed tonight, we would expect that he should bring it home in P3 if he can keep his head throughout the closing moments of this lap, or rather this race. He did find himself starting in P2, slipped down to P4 at a stage just before the pit stops, has been gifted a P3 in the final podium spot currently, due to Mike LaRue's drive-through penalty that he did get earlier, which I venture would be 4 track limit violations. But he certainly does again deserve this P3. But we do see Sas van der Westhuizen's closing down on the man now. He's got that gap just under 1.7 seconds. I would go as far as to say Hardus has likely burnt out as much rubber as he has to spare in trying to keep the pace that he had early in this race. But he should do well to stay ahead of Sas. But let's also not count out Sas van der Westhuizen. Started in P4, found himself dropping down the order a little bit, but he's earned those positions back. He's had a very consistent race until now as well. He has not let up on the timing charts, so he's done well to find himself just shy of 1.5 seconds off Hardus at the moment. Perhaps there's a bit more tire left towards the closing moments of this race to use and see if he can perhaps earn something in a final podium spot out of this all. But you'd say that he will not give up until the end, but perhaps also knows that if he does claim that spot, it's been through a lot of hard work until now. So it is 1.6 seconds that separates himself and Hardus Boyce in P3. We are now down to 1.5 minutes left of this race, so we should still see one more lap after the current one we're on. Mike LaRue, sadly, will feel he may have let himself down a bit. He was flying high earlier, starting in P6 if memory serves. He did climb up 4 positions before the pit stop that he went in for. He did come out as well right on the back of P1, perhaps giving himself some hope, but shortly after that he did earn himself a drive-through penalty, and that did see him drop all the way down from P2 into his current sitting of P5 position. So we would expect he will finish the race here, but certainly might be disappointed considering his performances before that drive-through penalty was earned. And Sean Bingham, I believe, started P7. He did find himself all the way down to P9 or P10 in the early stages of the race, but he's also done very well to earn all of those positions back and then find himself with a net gain as well. As we hear, the leader has now started the final lap, so we will still see one more lap from the rest of the field as well, except for those that might be just behind the leader in back markers. But certainly that does still give Sass a chance. If we just cast our eye forward to him, he did he had that gap down to 1.1 seconds, now 1.3 seconds. So he's certainly making hardest work all the way to the checkered flag for that final podium position. And then just behind Sean Bingham, who again we'll finish off to say has done very well to earn himself a net position gain from the start of the race. He also did find himself as possibly the biggest mover down and back up the grid of the top 10. So we do see that he's in P6 currently and should end there. Then behind him should be coming home in P7 would be Martin Groenewald, who was hanging onto the back of Mark Henneberry all race long, perhaps the smallest gap consistently throughout the entire field. Unfortunately, we saw a back marker go off, or rather go sideways, stay on the track after the chicane we see them go through now. That did perhaps lead to Mark Henneberry lifting slightly, but Martin Groenewald was certainly there to capitalize and take advantage of the situation. He'd earned the right to be there all race long, but out letting up from Mark Henneberry. And of course Mark Henneberry just behind him, currently sitting in P8, will perhaps feel a little let down that he did have to relinquish the position so easily to Martin Groenewald, but he certainly has every right to be happy with coming home in P8. He's also had a very strong race, absorbing pressure earlier from Martin Groenewald. He's got nothing to be disappointed about there. And Greg Hofart will come home in P8, or should come home in P8. He's also done very well. If my memory serves me, he was just outside of the top 10 at the start of the race, or was it P10? In fact, I believe it was P10 alongside Roxanne Bartle, but he's done very well to gain 2 positions. He's also had a bit of an eventful race with battles happening all throughout that P8 to P11 position at the starting stages of the race. Francois Erasmus as well. I don't know where he came from, where he started, but he did find himself jumping up to P9 during the pit stops. So another one of those that perhaps had a card up his sleeve to play during the pit stops. He did find himself gaining 2 positions at the time that I noticed. Could have been more from the start of the race, but certainly did very well to find himself in P9. He should certainly be happy with that. And another one, I'm not sure where they've come from, but Ronald Childs will round out the top 10. In fact, it looks like he's going up to P9 now. That might just be the timing towers deceiving us. No, sorry, he was P11 then. So who have we seen the change? Francois Erasmus rounded out the top 10 indeed. So that's our top 10. Congratulations again to Mikael Matthews, who is then the winner of this race. Nick Hodgson, who had a solid race in P2 behind him, and Hardis Boyser as the podium sitter, rounding out the final place on the podium in P3. And then I do see we've got one of our drivers that is sitting, waiting to jump off the podium and into the commentary booth. So I'm going to bring Nick Hodgson into the commentary booth now. Mikael's also going to join us. I'm going to jump in and ask Mikael, how did his race go? As the race winner, congratulations. It looks like you had a little bit of pressure after the pit stop there, but tell us about your race. How did it go out there? Certainly, yeah. Mike LaRue, I would say, actually played a bit of a magic card. Somehow gained about 4 or 5 seconds of the pit stop. So certainly, you may have felt unhappy with yours, but he also did do very well to pull out an amazing card there from the pit stops as well. But you absorbed the pressure well. You maintained your pace throughout as well. So well done for that, and well done again for the race win.
Thank you very much.
And then Nick Hodgson earning a P2 in the end there. Very well done as well for claiming that second position. Tell us about your race. It was quite a battle as well for that second, third, and fourth position going on in the opening stint.
Yeah, it was a bit of a race of attrition that I was playing there. I hadn't had a huge amount of time to prepare for this one, which was unfortunate because I thought this track was going to suit the Alpine quite well. Turns out when doing some sort of investigation, it actually looks like the Mercs, as we saw from Mike LaRue, the Mercs were going to be very, very strong here, and the Porsches should have been quite strong here as well. Even though the Alpine really drives nicely around Zolder, it's actually not the quickest car around here. So I was kind of hoping for the best of the Alpines, which I'll absolutely take. Very, very happy to gain a position from Mike Shame doing the track cuts thing, but that's part of Zolder, hey? It's you gotta manage those. But yeah, super surprised Mikhail as well. I can't believe how quick that McLaren is around here. I would have thought a track like Silverstone would have suited it a lot better. But congratulations, man! You found something in that car today, and yeah, very, very well done. I think I know why the gap was gained in the pits, though. I have a feeling that Mike may not have taken tyres. About a 4 to 5 second gap in the GT4s in a tyre. If you see that gain, you can generally put that down to tyres, because with our mandatory stop and the minimum pit stop time of 25 seconds, 30 seconds is changing tyres. So I wonder if Mike didn't not change tyres and the two of us changed tyres.
I think that might well have been the case, considering that Mike did come out right behind Mikhail, but very shortly afterwards losing about half a second, almost a second a lap over the first 2 laps on the outlap. So I definitely say perhaps had used quite a bit of rubber. Unfortunately, yep, those track cuts did come back to haunt him a bit, but as you say, that's the nature of Zolder. He was in a car that looked to be handling especially that bumpy chicane after the back straight very well compared to the Alpine and especially the McLaren. I saw Mikhail, you did get quite bumpy going through there when Mike was behind you, which perhaps also gave him a bit of an advantage there. But certainly it looked like it was good to see the difference between how the cars handle those curbs. That is, as you say, the nature of Zolder. Something that you have to deal with and manage is how your car behaves over those bumps, and also being sure not to cut too much of it. Looks like we are going to miss the final podium sitter, who was Hardest Boyser, but congratulations to him. Thanks again for tonight, guys. Did provide quite a bit of action throughout that top 4 and perhaps even top 5, with Sass coming in at the end once Mike LaRue dropped off. So yeah, congrats again. Any closing thoughts from yourself, Mikhail? All good. I think I did unfortunately miss the audio of your interview, so sorry about that. But yeah, just a bit of rustiness, let's say. Have had technical issues. It was a blessing to finally get it right at the last minute just before. So hopefully this will be something I can avoid for future streams and get a few more out to you guys. Shame you've been missing out this season. And then from yourself, Nick, any closing thoughts as well? Are you looking forward to next round? I haven't even cast a glance at what the track will be.
It's Bathurst. Definitely looking forward to that. I think the Mercs should be super strong at Bathurst. The Alpines should be pretty strong there as well. Certainly over the hill. I dread to think what Mikhail can do in his McLaren down that long straight. And certainly then Paul Ricard in I think it's round 6. But I love Bathurst. I think it's an amazing track, so really looking forward to that. Can't wait for that. And then yeah, we'll see how we go.
100%, yes. Bathurst always throws up some excitement in these GT cars, whether it be GT3 or GT4. So I'm also certainly looking forward to that. Hopefully I can maintain the consistency with avoiding technical issues. Shake off a bit of a rust to run the stream a bit better. But yeah, I'm looking very forward to being able to commentate on a Bathurst race in these GT4s. Thanks again for tonight, guys, and congratulations with the win, Mikhail, and P2 Nick. Certainly well deserved and earned.
Thanks, chaps. Appreciate the stream, guys. Much appreciated. Cheers all.
Cheers.
So that does round out Zolder for tonight. We saw wet qualifying that transitioned into a dry race. Some very good battles in the top 5 and right through to the top 10, in fact. Quite a lot of position changes. We saw some heartbreak for Mike LaRue, unfortunately, but certainly deserved podium finishes in the top 3 that we saw. And also a special mention to Sas van der Westhuizen, who was putting the pressure on for that final podium place in the closing laps, but certainly also well-deserved P4 in that. So we will be back hopefully in 3 weeks time for Bathurst. Always an exciting circuit, always a blessing to see the drivers master that tricky track, especially going through the mountain. But we'll do a proper recap hopefully next time of the current standing of the championship as well, and certainly hopefully get a good introduction into the next race. For now though, gents, it's good night from me. I hope you have enjoyed the race tonight. Keep an eye out for Sim F1 that will be coming up next week, and of course our simGT3 series that then follows 2 weeks after tonight as well. So keep an eye out for those. Those are always looking to provide just as much action as our GT4s did tonight. From me though, it's going to be good night, and we'll see you guys next time for Bathurst. Take care.